Hi.
Hi. Okay, got it. So we're all set. Skype sounds better, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
It sounded like
unfortunately,
you're. Yeah,
not much better.
both sound like
What's that?
you're somewhat in a box, but this is better than the cell
Okay,
phone.
great.
And you know what? I think it's okay. I have had some guests called by cell phone or they're in their car, and that sounds really bad. That sounds way better.
Okay.
All
Well,
right, guys. All right, so I will. So I'm going to do a three, two, one, and then I'll start the show from there. Okay.
thanks,
Sounds
CJ.
great.
Okay. All right. Ready? Three, two, one. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show that you can find at www.firedupwithcj.com. Today, we are going to be learning about writing your way from inspiration to publication. We have Dan Milliman and his daughter, Sierra Prasada, talking about their book, The Creative Compass. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good to be here.
CJ.
So everyone wants to write a book. I think I've talked to probably at least three people that say, I really think I ought to write a book. Everyone wants to write a book. And I think what I've noticed is that the reason that they don't is that it's hard to get started. It's hard to get started and people, they've never written a book, so they don't really have a guide. Was your book intended for this particular audience?
It was actually, it's for anyone who writes, and the five-stage creative process is something people go through whether they're aware of it or not. Even writing short essays, letters to friends, if they want to compose something properly. So it applies to any writing, and of course a book can range from a Kindle single for 20 pages to up to hundreds and hundreds of pages. So a book is just a word for a composite bit of writing from beginning to end. And the Creative Compass really speaks to any creative process, even writing music or painting pictures. But the book is specifically centered around those who would like to compose something like a book and become authors and reach out to a larger public.
Yeah, and so that was exactly the comment I was going to make because I actually read through the major points, which is dream is one stage, draft, develop, refine, and share. And my previous life has been as writing strategic plans, and this is exactly what you do in creating a strategic plan or a radio show. You go through the same process because I think it is the creative process in and of itself. So how do you think a structure like this helps? Sierra, what do you think about how a structure like this helps? Because I know that you and your dad have been kind of writing together and getting advice. Did this structure help you when you wrote your first book?
Well, this is a great time to emphasize that my dad and I don't think of ourselves as having invented the structure. We
Right.
really think of ourselves as just having described something that has been true about the way we worked and has described to varying degrees kind of how effectively we worked over the course of our own writing careers and lives. So that's really, the structure very much came out of the discussions that we've been having about writing for many years. And so it's not even something that we can necessarily choose to do, as weird as that may sound. As you yourself have just said, it really describes the creative process in general. The idea is that by knowing about these stages, by becoming aware of them, it helps us to orient ourselves. And it definitely helped me to orient myself. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that as well, Dad.
Well, it's been a tremendous help to me. I've actually learned quite a bit. It's not as if we had intact all the knowledge ready to go that was in the Creative Compass. C. Day Lewis, a poet, an Irish poet, father of Daniel Day-Lewis, the actor, once said, "I write not just in order to be understood, I write in order to understand." And in putting together the Creative Compass, I think we both learned and clarified the process for ourselves and our future projects, and as well as the one we just completed, but also helps us understand the past writing we've done and what's worked and what's not worked as well. In a way, we wrote this book for our younger selves. We wished we'd had this information when we started out, and we're writing for other writers out there aspiring to put together good books.
Yeah. So what got clarified for the two of you when and I think that's right, when you're actually doing the work, you become clear about the work yourself. That's oftentimes when I'm coaching clients. I think I should just listen to myself. Why don't I even take my own advice? But what is it that got clarified for you?
For me, working on the book, it really made me realize let me take the dream stage, the first stage, as an example, because a lot of the words that we use to talk about creativity are words that have become, and we use them so frequently that I don't think we even necessarily think about what they mean. So the word dream, just in thinking about it as a stage, my dad and I both had to come back to this idea of what does that actually mean? When we use the same word to describe, an experience we have when we sleep and a creative experience we have when we're awake, what does it really mean, this creative experience of dreaming? And we realized that when it came to the dream stage, this is when we were really dreaming with the idea of producing something. And that made a huge difference, just that one thing. We were going on a journey. We were actually, looking toward another point that we were going to head toward. And in that stage, we had to not only, generate ideas, and that involves, of course, being actually receptive and permitting ourselves to dream, to let those ideas come to us, to take that time, but also cultivating those ideas, really taking the time to cultivate those ideas into whatever they're meant to become, whether it's a story or a symphony or a dance or a strategic plan. And that process is really so important, and thinking about the various steps of that process really has changed me as a writer. I definitely feel like I can go forward and I'll know more, even when things get difficult, I'll have a sense of, okay, things often get difficult at this point.
Is that how you were changed by the process? Because you know that there's going to be an answer, even though there's a part that you may get stuck at certain points?
Exactly. It's kind of like the idea behind the 5 stages was really that you could have sort of an aerial view of the whole route you were going to travel. And it doesn't mean you've already traveled it, but it means you have a sense, you have a kind of second sight that supports you, especially when things seem really, really tough, which of course they always do at points.
Hey, Dan, what is the most, when you look at this, take an aerial view and you look at these stages, which for you has been usually the most difficult stage?
Well, I have to say probably all of them in their own way, but different ways. In one of the chapters in the book, I described somewhat tongue-in-cheek the phases I go through in writing. In the first phase, I call my pre-procrastination phase. I'm not quite ready to procrastinate yet, but I'll get to it soon. And that develops into the procrastination phase. But now, understanding dream much better, I give myself permission, and I can appreciate that those so-called procrastination phases are a necessary time of percolation. As Sierra also expressed, we need to give ourselves permission to dream and the time to do it. It can take days, hours, weeks, months, or even for some people, years. Dreaming about ideas, people so many times ask, what inspired you to write this book? Where did you get your idea? And so the dream phase is about getting these ideas until we find what we call that sticky idea. But in terms of the overall view, CJ, to answer your question, each stage has its challenges. We emphasize in the book the stage that writers most often skip, which we call the development phase.
Okay, got it. I want to go back to the dream stage because I think for me, at least when I'm doing strategic planning, when I'm planning a show, that's the one that's actually the most challenging sometimes for me. I mean, what would be, and some of the advice that you're giving, I think is really great, which is to give yourself permission, and those pieces that feel like you're digressing or procrastinating are actually part of the process.
Yes.
What other parts do you think are important to understand at that dream stage and, being open and receptive? But how do you give yourself permission to dream? It's almost as if as a society we've forgotten how to do this.
That's a great question. And I think that each person has to answer it individually, which I'm sure you'd agree. And that's one of the things we emphasize in the book at large. There's a reason the subtitle is Writing Your Way from Inspiration to Publication. Because we really have to discover our own way. And of course, one of the ways we do that is by permitting ourselves to dream and by permitting ourselves to, what we call in the book, get to know thyself. Because it really isn't just an instantaneous, command we can fulfill. It's a lifelong process of getting to know yourself. And the dream stage is a wonderful stage to really, because it's the beginning. There is something special about a beginning. As you've already said, CJ, it's difficult to begin. But it's also this amazing opportunity, especially when it comes to dreaming, because we're so free in that period. And really, I think the first step for anyone, I will say, is just to realize that how free we really are. Just to come up with ideas, to have contradictory ideas at one time. Nothing's on paper. Nothing's in stone or clay. So we don't have to commit to anything yet. We can think about all the possibilities.
Right, and that's going back to the earlier statement, just giving yourself permission to have it express whatever way it wants to come out. It's funny, I'll coach clients, and at the end I'll say, and it's amazing to me all the different ways that people dream. Sometimes people like to sketch your ideas. Sometimes people want to actually do those, I can't even think this way, but they do those big bubbles with arrows drawing all over them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes people like to listen to songs. Like there's all different ways that people actually get into that dream state. Dan, you've written a lot of spiritual books. How much does that get? Do you do meditations? Are there other methods that you use that are spiritual based?
Well, I like to kind of blend spirituality with practicality. I head in the clouds, but feet on the ground. And so we actually have some very concrete approaches in the Creative Compass for dreaming. We have one chapter called the What If, which is a statement that helps people find the dramatic core of the story, the narrative they want to tell, whether it's memoir, whether it's fiction, but it's a story they want to tell. To find that is using a one-sentence statement of 25 words or less that includes the protagonist, the antagonist, or the opposing forces, the place, a sense of place, and what is the challenge, what is the conflict, all that in one sentence. It's not easy to do, but it's extremely helpful to come up with that idea, that sticky idea. We have another chapter talking about a sticky idea and why it's different from just a good idea. I did gymnastics for many years. Most people have seen people who run for the vault. They run and they vault over this object and do one big move. And if someone doesn't run fast enough, nothing that happens afterward matters, because they have to do that first beginning properly. And that's why the dream phase is so important. Many people take off with a merely good idea when they haven't waited for that sticky idea that is worth spending a year. So we have other methods, dreaming in dialogue, to help one get started when one feels blocked or nothing seems to be flowing. So even though, yes, I've written books in the spiritual or inspirational genre, good writing is good writing. And so the dream phase and these sticky ideas and these methods we convey in the book help people to dream effectively. It's not just a passive, receptive state. You wait for an idea.
So for you, if you actually look at this book as an example of the process that you've gone through, how long did the dreaming process take? And you also have the two of your dreams combining together. What was that like?
Sierra, what do you think?
It was pretty much, I think, like writing any book. And, the funny part is that, of course, we're writing the book describing the process of how we're writing the book. So that was an unusual element.
Right.
And we, for example, we sold the book as a proposal. We then wrote a draft. We split up the chapters. We each wrote our own set of chapters, and then we swapped them and did our first edit before we handed in the first submission draft to our publisher. And, we got it back twice, the first time thinking we were doing a developmental edit, and the second time thinking we were moving on to the copy edit. And that's a point when we ended up having to do a second developmental edit. So we really lived our own process throughout the entire stages, and getting to know it even as we continued, through it ourselves.
And you still love each other after this process?
We
still speak on the radio. Just kidding.
Well, I was imagining I was just helping my children with their homework, and there's just more frustration on both sides than I could ever imagine. And I just kept on thinking, how did these guys end up writing a book? I can't even imagine. And really, the voice is very consistent when you read this book. I've actually read books where there have been 2 or 3 contributors, and you can feel the shifts, and it doesn't feel comfortable as a reader, but you really did a beautiful job at creating one voice with 2 people. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you. That was our aim, to create that one voice, reaching across the generations so we could touch upon writers at every stage of the process.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure how many people do this, go writing together, but what was that like as a father and daughter to go through that?
Well, for me, it was a passing, in a sense, a passing of the relay baton or the torch. We bring different foundation elements to our work. I have many years of experience and 17 books. Sierra has a very, very strong foundation that I didn't have when I started out, and great experience too. So we just brought our own resources and ended up writing a better book than either one of us probably could have done on our own.
Yeah, I love the idea that, in fact, both of you are at different stages in your career, and in fact, that's one of the strengths because you can bring both of those perspectives to bear when you're writing. Sarah, how did that work for you? I mean, how did you see that your experience and exactly where you are right now really helped write the book?
Yeah, I think that in my case, I had written one book before, and I had also spent the year before writing in depth about 20th century history on my lit history blog, the 20th Century Project. And both of those experiences really contributed to this being a good time for me to write the book. I felt like I had the experience, and when I talk about experience, I mean that particular experience of being a writer and working with editors over the years. And that really acquaints you with the collaborative aspect of writing, because we often talk about the solitary aspect, of course, but really it is a very collaborative craft and art. And so I wasn't really apprehensive about working with my dad because I had had that experience many times with others as well as with him.
Right. All right, so let's actually go through. We talked a little bit about the dream stage. So if it's possible, talk about the book and the various stages that you've gone, how you actually walk through the actual outline in your book. At a very high level, I guess, because there's just so many chapters in this book. But how did you dream together about the book, and did you use all the different aspects of it or parts of it?
Well, at a chapter by chapter level, we each had a topic, and then you have a topic, you face the computer, the keyboard, the piece of paper and pen, and say, okay, I have a topic. Now what comes up? And that's, every writer faces that. What do I have to say? And we start writing notes. And Sarah reminded me a while ago that one can do a lot of writing before one actually begins officially drafting, starting with page one. Taking notes, ideas, snippets of ideas from one area and another, and eventually they integrate and they come together, and that depends on each writer's process and approach. I tend to kind of throw everything out there intuitively and then structure later, where Sierra begins, she works more from a structured outline, which I admire. I wish I could do that. So we do have different approaches, and that's why it's important we emphasize that each writer approaches it their way, but we help them to do their way better.
Okay, got it. So who wrote the dream chapter, the dream stages?
We each wrote chapters in each stage, so it's very
wow.
much collaboration in every sense of the word.
Yeah. So what's your favorite chapter? What is your favorite chapter within the dream stage, Sierra?
Ooh, that's a tough one, honestly. I am very partial to the chapter on Get to Know Thyself because it's a phrase that drove me crazy when I was younger. I think I first saw it in a really prominent place at my university career placement office, and I did not appreciate it at the time. Right. It felt like a huge bar to have to surmount in order to figure out, what internship I might want. Right. And so realizing later on that it really is something you work on over time, and that there's all kinds of wisdom out there as to how to do that. Was a huge relief to me, and I can imagine it would be a relief to others as well.
What's the main idea of get to know yourself in the context of writing, or is it just in the context of life and the related?
Sure. Yeah, it's very much both. In the context of writing, it's very much the sense that there is a time to immerse oneself totally in the work, and there is also a time to actually consider how one makes the choices one does in terms of the work, and whether those choices are effective for us. I feel like there's an ongoing dialogue today about habit and the influence of habit in our lives, and the strange kind of eccentric ways that we pick up habits that may or may not serve us. And so we have an opportunity as writers, because so much of what we do is about insight, is about sight, is about observing others and ourselves. We have this opportunity to actually think about what drives us to make a certain choice as a writer, whether it be process, what we're actually doing, whether we're writing on computer or on with pen and paper, or craft, what choices we're making about character. And there's a real sense of symmetry in these experiences too, which I always gain a lot from.
So then, what I'm hearing you say is, I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying correctly. So there's a certain, and I've been hearing this throughout. There's a kind of style that we have in terms of habits and how we like to work. Like Dan was saying, he's more intuitive. You like to actually work for a structure, and then that parallels in every aspect while you're writing. Is that what you meant?
That's definitely part of it. Part of it is also the idea that what often happens is that we figure out our strengths and we cling to them almost like they're a life raft, on a stormy sea, and we fear our weaknesses. But really what we can do is, by getting to know both our strengths and our weaknesses, we can not only improve our weaknesses, but we can also figure out how to use our strengths to work around our weaknesses. And there's less a relationship of fear and more of knowledge and skill building over time.
So, and in the example that you were talking about earlier, so Dan, you're saying that you work with things intuitively, and then Sierra works with things in a process way. That in fact, both of those are strengths. And then what I'm hearing you do is, when you work together, you got to kind of see how to combine those strengths together. Was it like that in practice?
It is, definitely. We complemented one another's work and bringing different resources. Now, I know you do intuitive coaching in the job market and so on, CJ, and this idea of knowing oneself. Some people pick the right mate or the right job for the wrong person, the one they thought they were. So the better we know ourselves, what genres we like to read, what we like to write about, the more we can home in and share more effectively with others. Of course, there are a number of other chapters in the dream section, such as finding your sticky idea and the what if chapter I had mentioned, and dreaming in dialogue. So every chapter complements that overall stage, from dreaming through drafting, through development and refining, and finally how to share effectively.
So how does one find a sticky idea? I think that's one of the hardest things, because we think it's sticky, but other people may not think it's sticky. How does one know that it's a sticky idea?
Well, actually, a sticky idea is less about how others react to it and more about how the creator themselves reacts. Because sometimes we come up with an idea and we might be really into it and, write it down and think about it for a couple days. And then it just sort of runs out of energy. We don't end up creating anything with it. We may even just forget about it. And what that says to us is that it wasn't a sticky idea. And what that essentially means is it wasn't an idea that meant something deep enough to us over a period of time for it to command that kind of energy. And so essentially some ideas we find, over months or years, they just keep coming back to us. And it's partly because they seem like they're almost woven into the fabric of our lives. It's almost like, you're on one river and you keep intersecting with other rivers, and that idea is almost like a boat that it will appear and disappear and appear and disappear. And maybe it takes you 5 or 10 years before you do something with it. But there is a kind of magic in the sense that, okay, that's an idea that is going to take you somewhere, because it's an idea that means something personally to you. It's an idea that's calling you, in a sense.
Right, you have your inner fire that just doesn't go out regardless of what storms life happens. It's there all the time, and that's the kind of enduring sticky idea that you need to pursue. It's almost like it's kind of like your spirit's calling. And I don't know, that sounds probably corny, but in my world, that's how I think of it.
You definitely have the idea. And part of it also is just giving ourselves a break for the ideas we don't do anything with. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It doesn't mean we're procrastinators and we're lazy. It means that maybe that wasn't the right idea and we needed to free ourselves to move on.
Okay, now here's the thing that's so hard. When I was doing video editing, you have these sacred cows who are like, oh my gosh, that was just such a great idea, but I have to cut it because it It really, even though I love that idea, I'd like to keep it someplace in my journal or remember it. I can't, I need to cut it because it's kind of discursive to the overall flow of the video or the book. Or how do you cup those sacred cows? You know, they're just so brutal to do and you just love them so much, but how do you do that?
Well, I can tell a quick story. Sierra was editing a novel, a major novel I had written called The Journeys of Socrates, and I just said, "Could you review it and tell me what you think about it?" And she outlined the whole book and restructured it and said, "By the way, Dad, you've got to throw away the last 300 pages of the book." And she was right. I let two characters that I was just having such a good time writing, they hijacked the story from the protagonist. And I realized, somewhat reluctantly, that that those weeks and weeks of work just had to go.
Yeah.
And that marks a professional. What doesn't serve the whole, what doesn't serve the initial vision, has to go. And often these precious sentences, we get this inspired, flowing sentences, lyrical, but as you were pointing out, it just doesn't fit within the larger piece. In fact, there's a chapter in the refine section later on, a later stage of the book, when it's time to prune and choose the right word and polish. We have a chapter called Creative Destruction, when we have to recognize how a book can be vastly improved by judicious pruning.
And I guess that's the creative destruction part is I think one of the hardest parts because it gets tied to your ego, right? That's a part of me now. So chopping that out is like chopping your limb. That's what it feels like to me. I don't know if it feels like it for you.
Sure.
Did you end up having to do anything with those 300 pages? Or did you just kind of keep them and kind of, I love these characters, here's a memorial to their lives, which have come to a quick end?
Well, the book just went in another direction at the ending, and it was even stronger, and it worked better. And so, in this case, Sierra, my rigorous editor, was really, that's the collaboration involved in any kind of project.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sarah, you were saying something too.
Oh, I was just going to say that I do think, there's no question, it's difficult to get rid of things that we've worked on, that we've slaved over, that we really care about. But I think there's two things that can really help. One is we don't have to literally get rid of it. We can think of ourselves first as simply putting it aside. And sometimes we do come back to those pieces as individual elements and work them over into other things. And a second aspect of that is I think it gets easier, and this is another kind of gift that came out of the 5 stages for me, is realizing that there is something different. There is an important difference between the idea for a project that exists in my mind, the sense of that project in its entirety, and any current incarnation of that project in real life. Because that really is the essential question. I mean, we all know that anyone who creates something goes through multiple layers of revision. Anyone who knows anything about creativity knows that, intuitively and from experience. And so the question is, how do we do that? How do we go back to something that we thought was perfect at one point and work it over entirely? Sometimes, as you have pointed out, throwing out something major that we really liked. And there's only one way to do that, which is to come back to it with new eyes.
Yeah, put it away for a while and look at it and then see that doesn't make sense anymore.
Exactly. That's definitely one way. And I think backing, many different strategies, including that one, which is a great one, is just this sense that they are two different things. And, we have the third stage, develop, is really the stage where we focus on this. And we take this word development from partly the film industry, because it's a word that's often used, the whole concept of a film or a screenplay being in development. And it's really a word that deserves wider usage. Because the idea behind development is this sense, a film is a great example because we know when we watch a film that is quite different from the screenplay that inspired it. You can sit down and read a screenplay, you watch a film, they're two different things and yet they're intimately connected. And really we have the same thing, working as writers on a book. The film is sort of that published book. And the screenplay, in a sense, is the idea, the screenplay is this idea that we're working on over time that's then going to give rise to that final creation, as opposed to being totally the same thing as it.
So how do you link the two together? How do you link the idea of the screenplay, which was the storyboards or the ideas that you had or the creative brief, and then you actually have the actual movie? What's the mapping process of this is what I originally intended, this is what I have right now?
Sure. Well, a lot of it is this idea about what you can and cannot see, the visible work and the invisible work.
Mm.
It is very tough, I think. I mean, books are a great example in this way because anyone can go to their shelf, they can pick up a book, and it's really easy to imagine for anyone that the author sat down and they wrote the opening line, and then they wrote the next line, and they went all the way through until they wrote the last line, end of book. But of course, it never works that way. So we can't see all the other layers, all the other versions of that text, some of which we may not have even wanted to read, even for our favorite book. And so doing that extrapolation, just thinking to yourself, whenever you read a book, realizing, oh, the author actually made these choices. These were the final layer of choices made by the author, I think is kind of the revelation in itself. And that, I think, just even thinking that way for me gives me the freedom to realize that my first decision doesn't have to be the right one.
Ah, right, because you can always go back. It's like life. You just go back and make other choices. And that it kind of probably takes off a lot of pressure for writing it perfectly from beginning to end, because you can go back and tweak and refine over time.
Exactly.
Also, one of our early chapter titles in the draft section is called Permit Yourself to Write Badly.
I do that all the time.
Well, we need that, and many writers feel blocked because they don't give themselves that permission, but we have to write badly before we can write well. That's the emphasis on layers. There's another chapter, The Cycles and Layers of Learning. So the job of a writer is not to write perfectly, it's to write onward.
Okay, wait, and we have a couple minutes left. Quick question. So how long, so Dan, you've been writing 17 books over a period of time. In terms of a process kind of logistic question, I don't know if you can answer this because I know it's probably particular to each person, but for you, how has the process refined over time? I mean, how long did it take you? You said that your first book, I think, was 7 years, or it took a long time to write. And how has that been refined or more efficient as a result of having this process, or just generally?
Well, I like to say that each book is easier and easier to write, but every book poses its own challenge. It has its own story, its own creation story. Yes, my first book had to draw upon my life, and I had to develop myself before I could develop the work. So it was 6 or 7 years before, from the initial idea to write something, and it took shape as Way of the Peaceful Warrior. But my second book, I wrote 10 years later. I was quite excited about some new information I wanted to share. That book was 6 months from the time I had an idea to write to the time it was on the bookstore shelves. So most books take about a year, but there is no single measure for what a book should take. With each of us and every new book, even with a lot of experience, it's like beginner's mind. It's starting again.
You made an interesting comment that you had to develop yourself before you develop the book, and I think that's true with a lot of the coaching that I've done. Does that mean for you in your particular context?
Well, I'm about to start a new project, the third and final book in the Peaceful Warrior saga, and I'm just focusing kind of a filter, looking at life through certain filters along the lines of the topics I'd like to cover in the context of the story. So I'm going through the same phase, but I can do it more consciously now. Understanding the 5 stages that we describe in the Creative Compass lets me, even though I helped write this new book, helps me to understand my process and appreciate it, accept it more. And I've gone through the same difficulties with each book, but now I really recognize them like old friends, and I know I will get through that as well.
All right, Sierra, as we conclude, are there any other tips that you would give to new writers who are kind of daunted, or, aside from buying the book, of course, which is The Creative Compass, Writing Your Way from Inspiration to Publication, any other thoughts? And I know at the very end I want to make sure to get your websites too, but any other kind of closing thoughts?
Sure. I would just say that, one chapter in particular in the book, we talk about how to read writing books and the idea that, I know in my own life, I definitely have used reading about things as a way to procrastinate from actually doing them.
Right.
And so there's a certain irony to working on a writing book myself,
right,
knowing that. And one of the things we really emphasize in the book is this idea that you want to be doing the thing you love while you're learning about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I try to do as much as possible. And so that's what I would advise young writers is do educate yourself. There's nothing wrong with going out there and reading about writing and, reading as a writer and studying and talking to other writers. This is not procrastination. It is important work. But just do it while you're actually writing. Do carve out some time in your day to do the writing itself, because in the end, it really is a pleasure, and no one should deny themselves that.
Yes, it's called in coaching the denial stage. We were like, oh yes, I'm doing moving forward, even though I'm not writing a stitch. All right, guys, tell us about your website and how to get more information, and also your online class.
Well, if someone goes to peacefulwarrior.com, there's a link to several online courses, including one that we developed called Discover Your Creative Compass. So that's an online course. What's nice is people actually pay pretty much whatever they choose. So anyone can afford the course. And it's quite helpful to get people going and started and more clarity. And it's aligned with the book. The book is sort of a text for the course. Sierra and I will be teaching a workshop at Omega Institute next spring, together, a workshop on the Creative Compass. And her website, quite an interesting site, is Sierra Prasada, SIERRAPRASADA, sierraprasada.com. So someone can visit peacefulwarrior.com or Sierra Prasada to find out more information.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Fantastic. Great information. I love the spirit in which you're writing us, and I love the fact that you have an online course, because that will be, I think, really encouraging for folks to use the book. Creative Compass, Writing Your Way from Inspiration to Publication, is kind of like your handbook to have that you walk around with. Love it. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, CJ.
Okay, so as I was going through, I thought, no, I'm just going to talk through, because cutting every 12 minutes is going to be weird and awkward, and I don't need to do that. I'll just play 40 minutes without commercial, because it's so much better, I think, than to cut it up.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so
I think you're absolutely right.
Cut it up. As I was doing it, I'm like, no, this is not going to work cutting it up.
It flowed well. We went with the flow.
Did you get the points that you wanted to get across? Was this okay?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's great. So CJ, it's going to go to radio in June. Is it not going to be up till then? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually give you the MP3, but it's not going to have like it's not going to have the intro, and it's not going to have it's not going to sound as, well, I think we'll sound professional, but I mean, I think it just depends on what you want to use it for. If you have, content and you want people to know about, like, here's what the basic idea is, go listen to this radio interview, then I can get that to you right away.
But just let us know when it's available.
Yeah.
If there's a link,
that's totally fine. June is fine.
I'll give you what the radio will do is they'll have it will sound more like, live from CJ, blah, 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 we'll have that kind of thing, and then they'll have, something at the end. So there's not that much to the beginning and end. I can probably find a way for them to add the beginning and end so that you could get it sooner, because it sounds like you'd want that before your spring class.
Oh, in this case, it really is more just a question of having a link if we do, just letting people know on Twitter or whatever that the interview has happened. So when it comes. So when in June? Do you know, or is it?
No, because I have to. It's probably going to be sometime when I'm on vacation, and I'm going to play this as a pre-recorded show, and it won't fit the format of the other shows, but it doesn't matter, because I just want it. I think it felt much better to flow with the whole thing beginning to end.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So probably be in June. Can I here's what I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to be going on vacation, so I don't know when it's going to play, but it'll be playing when I go on vacation. So it'll probably be...
You have a lovely vacation.
It'll probably be end of June, mid-July. That would be like...
Okay, yeah. If you remember to drop us an email, it'd be great, but no worries either way.
I'll definitely do that for sure.
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Glad we can fill in for you while you're on a holiday.
Yeah, me too. Hey, thanks a lot, guys.
CJ,
appreciate it. And Dan,
care.
I want to interview you for your next book. That'd be great to read your next version of your book, the 3rd edition, whenever that comes out.
Definitely stay in touch, please.
Okay, all right, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Care.